Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
There was a time where the trend in Hollywood movies was that the third in the franchise would normally suck. And most movie franchises have fallen prey to this very curse. It always feels like it was made because the studio wants to make a bit more money, or a director wants to revisit his past glory and end up messing up their own established movies. The classic Godfather series had a third entry which can only be considered average at best. X-Men The Last Stand truly sucked with none of the substance that made the first two memorable. Batman Forever also sucked, and Batman and Robin, which was the fourth movie, has a reputation for being one of the worst films of all time.
7 million. Never leave the cave without it.
This was the established trend, and unfortunately, even Christopher Nolan fell prey to this to an extent. The Dark Knight Rises pales in comparison to Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And if you are honest with yourself, you know this to be a fact.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
With that said, it's not strange to me that Spider-Man 3 also fell prey to this back in 2007, as it felt rushed and overstuffed. Yet the simple fact is, Spider-Man 3 is a good movie. But when you have had an excellent film like the first one and watched the perfection that was the second movie, having a third movie which is just good will inevitably disappoint the fans who loved the first two. In their eyes, the movie becomes mid, and that's the problem here. As I did with my previous Spider-Man videos, I'll be analyzing this movie through the actions of its characters, because to me, it's the most effective way to show you the deficiencies that plague this final film in the Raimi series. Spider-Man 3 feels like a lost opportunity, and if you would give me a bit of your time, then join me as we delve into this movie.
And here we go.
The main thing that works about this movie is the story of Sandman and how he is used to contrast Peter's actions throughout this film. It's also the strongest aspect of this movie, which I feel could have been the entire focus here. You see, the essence of Flint Marko's story is this. What if one misguided action ruined the course of your life forever?
I'm not a bad person. Just had bad luck.
And frankly, that is something that everyone can relate to because we all have some of our things that we regret. And the crux of Spider-Man 3 is Peter giving in to his inner darkness after attaining the black suit, while Flint Marko is doing bad things with good intentions at heart, as he is doing all he can to save the life of his daughter Penny. It's a story of Peter's regression into the boy that just wanted to use his power for personal gain before Uncle Ben's words, while Flint is a man whose many blunders keep dragging him into a life of sin and regrets. It's a powerful message here, except the movie is bogged down by so much stuff, which ends up convoluting the story and messaging. You see, the main themes of Spider-Man 3 is ego and forgiveness, and throughout the movie, all the actions that is committed by the characters and their redemptions or lack thereof revolves around this. If you add in Peter and Eddie's dependence on the symbiote, then the entire movie can be viewed as an allegory for addiction. Now, one of the best sequences in Spider-Man 3 was the birth of a Sandman, which is a scene that showcases Marko's transformation into Sandman. It is a scene that makes you feel deep emotions for grains of sand on a screen, and it has always been one of my favorites in the Raimi films. What this scene highlights best is the sheer willpower to save the life of his daughter, which forces him to reconstruct himself and push himself forward. It makes Sandman's motivation throughout this movie clear and relatable. And while his actions may not be condoned, you as the audience member understand him. All of Marko's sins stem from this very motivation, and it's this same goal that has even cost him his place among his family. But it's the only goal he has, and with his power, he will stop at nothing until he achieves it. So inevitably, it can only lead to conflict with Spider-Man. It's such a human and powerful motivation that I feel Sandman should have been the only villain in focus for this entire film. And the story that could have been told from this would have been better than what we eventually got. But I digress. Now, I don't mind that Flint Marko was made to be the person that shot Uncle Ben, as it makes the conflict between him and Peter a deeply personal one. It also helps to showcase that Peter has a darkness inside, and this is shown with his actions towards Flint after this revelation. Peter is driven by revenge here after imagining that Flint shot and killed Uncle Ben in cold blood. It helps to showcase that Peter is not a person above emotions like vengeance, and even as a hero, he has his own moral failings. Peter forgets that this is the same drive that made him complicit in the death of Dennis Carradine in Part 1, and he is about to make that same mistake again. Yet due to the symbiote's influence, his need for vengeance is amplified, whereas the old Peter would have tried to find out why and learn the truth. We as the audience will later learn in the film that Marko was being talked down successfully by Uncle Ben, before his partner bumped into him and the gun went off. He gave himself up for this, as it haunts him to this very day. This is the very reason why he was in prison in the first place. This also shows that Flynn's actions may be heinous, but he also has a moral standard he adheres to. The resolution to Spider-Man and Sandman's conflict in this movie is fitting for what we got, as the theme of forgiveness that was established before the characters and their actions is strongly highlighted here too. As Mary Jane and Harry all learn to forgive Peter, he also forgives Sandman for the death of Uncle Ben. And to make this theme even more prevalent, Eddie Brock, who is the only person to refuse to forgive, is the only villain that dies in the end due to his own ego too.
I like being bad. It makes me happy.
I always felt that Peter could have done more to help Sandman and his daughter, which could have been a much better end to this film. Peter and Dr. Connors, both being scientists, could have figured out the solution to the problem of his atomization. And maybe they also could have helped with a research grant for his daughter's illness. And this would have allowed Marco to leave the life of crime behind. But in hindsight, it's also because of this misstep that makes No Way Home such an excellent third entry, because Peter finally gets to heal Sandman in that film, redeeming him from his fate. The second strongest aspect of this movie is the depiction of Mary Jane and Peter's relationship, and this is because it addresses the consequences of the choice that she made in Spider-Man 2. While Peter's life is on the rise, Mary Jane's is falling apart, yet Peter, being Spider-Man and his growing arrogance, cannot be there for her, as he also has to prioritize himself and saving lives. The love and adoration that Peter gets, and her own obscurity, begins to foster jealousy towards the man that she threw her life away for. This was the fate that was hinted at in the closing of Spider-Man 2, and unfortunately, she did it to herself. The straw that breaks the camel's back is the moment that Gwen Stacy kisses Peter in public in the same way that she had when she was obsessed with Spider-Man. And while I'm not condoning Peter's actions here, it was a publicity stunt.
Go ahead, lay one on me.
But this action leads her to seek comfort in the arms of Harry Osborn, who in her eyes represent the time in the past where things were far less complicated and she felt like she could have it all. In a sense, Harry becomes her escape from her brutal reality of her own choices. I will also mention that Mary Jane is not the only person to blame for the events that unfold here, because Peter was also at fault. Before Peter embarks on his path of vengeance against Sandman, Mary Jane tries to pull him back from the brink by being there for him, but he shuns her. This action is what leads her to seek company with Harry when she felt her lowest after taking work as a waitress. In comparison to Peter, Harry genuinely wants to be there for her, and throughout this entire movie, this was the only thing that she was seeking from Peter, and he failed to do this. Aunt May's words to Peter that
a man has to be understanding and put his wife before himself
was meant to highlight this exact point. And while she's feeling good and getting what she wanted, she makes the choice of kissing Harry. This action is what Harry's goblin personality uses to damage the relationship between her and Peter. It later becomes the cause of the fight between the former friends, as Peter gives in to the influence of the symbiote suit. This scene,
I don't want to see you anymore.
It's not Mary Jane. It's Mary Jane being used as a tool by Harry to hurt Peter emotionally in a bid to make him easier to kill. But unfortunately, Harry had miscalculated, as Peter, under the influence of the symbiote suit, humiliates him and nearly kills him. Peter's actions at the jazz club with Gwen Stacy, who was supposed to be Eddie's girl, is also him seeking revenge for what Mary Jane had been forced to do to him. Initially, what was meant to be an emotional way to hurt Mary Jane in a bid to get even, ends with Peter assaulting her due to his lack of self-control and aggression. We know this was due to the influence of the symbiote, hence the allegory for addiction. And this is also the moment that Peter realizes how deeply he has fallen from the person that he used to be and decides to reclaim himself by removing the symbiote suit. But after all the mess that had been made of the relationship between Peter and Mary Jane, it's fitting that the last scene of this movie is Peter extending his hand to her, which she takes. This scene is the true beginning of their relationship. They know now what it would take to stay together and build something worthwhile. No obsessions, no infatuations, it's simply love, forgiveness, and acceptance.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Now I will be discussing some aspects of this movie that did not work. And to begin with, Harry's storyline in this film feels completely hollow and contrived. From the previous story and the comics, we all expected Harry to become the next Goblin, which was a foregone conclusion. But the depiction of the conflict between him and Peter is completely butchered for the sake of runtime and convenience. After Harry becomes the Goblin, he attacks Peter in a bid to take his revenge. Yet the moment he bumps his head, he conveniently forgets the parts of his life where he knew Spider-Man's identity as well as his father's death. I always found the short-term amnesia extremely contrived, as coincidentally, it's at this point in the film that Flynn Marko is being established as the Sandman. And as a fan of telenovelas, I can tell you that this is a well-used trope in most shows, and the reason why it's done there like in this movie is to put a storyline on hold to establish a new one. It's simply lazy writing. Conveniently, he regains his memory as soon as Peter attempts to kill Sandman, and again becomes a villain, threatening Mary Jane to become his accomplice in his plan for revenge. His actions here leads to a fight with Peter, where he ends up with a bomb being thrown in his face, removing him from the story again. This is also when we are shown that Sandman had survived the attempt on his life, and teams up with Venom to eliminate Spider-Man. Later, when Mary Jane is captured, he is again brought back into the story to have his butler reveal to him that yes, his father really did kill himself, so he should go help his friends.
The blade that pierced his body came from his glider.
In all honesty, that entire scene is absolutely weak, and even though it's contrived, it's also poorly done. You are telling me that Harry didn't check his own father's body and see these wounds? Why, is he afraid of corpses or something? In the second movie, it had been clearly established that his mind had been broken, as he finds out who his father was, yet still chose to blame Peter for his death. The glider is in his lab, yet you are telling me that we needed this manufactured butler to use talk no jutsu to convince him? Fuck out of here. It genuinely feels like they didn't know how to develop Harry's turn into a villain, or they simply lost interest in the storyline. As such, the logical next step is to have him and Peter team up in a tag match against Venom and Sandman, where he loses his life, making him a fallen hero. This action also establishes Venom's villain credibility, so we don't feel too bad when he dies. It's simply a waste of a character. As a follow-on, the final confrontation of this movie does not work, and if I am being honest, it feels overdone and tedious. In the previous Spider-Man films, there have always been scenes where the citizens have been of help to Spider-Man in one way or another when he is in a jam. In the first movie, it's the New Yorkers on the bridge.
You mess with Spider, you mess with New York! You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us!
And in the second movie, it's the citizens in the train.
You want to get to him, you got to go through me.
And me.
Me too.
In this movie, there is an entire news report in real time as the gathered audience give their live reactions to Spider-Man being hammered by Sandman.
It's hard to believe what's happening. The brutality of it.
I understand that it's meant to represent the threat of the villains as well as pull on the heartstrings of the audience, but in my opinion, it's completely unnecessary given the environment and what's at stake. There is a truck full of bricks and a taxi suspended with webs a few stories up. There is also a sand creature half the size of Godzilla wreaking havoc. And you are telling me that these people will stand there, cheer and react like they are at a music festival and their favorite singer is on stage? Seriously. And before this entire final act, Spider-Man has to pose in front of the American flag and get a standing ovation by the gathered audience, like he is a 5-star general returning after winning a war for his nation. I get the fact that these movies have to show some patriotism, especially as 9/11 was released 6 years after this point. But the entire thing feels super forced and unnecessary. It has simply made this scene extremely cheesy. Harry coming in for the save makes for a few good moments, sure. It's supposed to represent old friends reuniting after letting go of their grudges. Yet this also diffuses every tension in this scene as they begin to crack jokes while Mary Jane is still supposed to be hanging on for dear life here. Sometimes, less is more. Eddie Brock and his transformation to Venom in this movie does not work. His motivation for wanting Peter dead are weak, and the entire transformation feels abrupt. In the original comics, Eddie Brock is a journalist who publicly exposes the identity of a man he believes to be the serial killer Sin Eater. Spider-Man later catches the real killer, which ends up ruining his reputation. Eddie was only trying to do good, but due to the single mistake, he is disgraced and becomes suicidal after all he has worked for is ripped away and he is left with nothing. He later comes into contact with the symbiote and their bond becoming Venom. And since they already hate Spider-Man, they begin hunting him as their mutual enemy. Eddie does not harm innocent people, but the same cannot be said for the villains he hunts. He is in essence an anti-hero. And as much as it pains me enough to say this, Tom Hardy's portrayal in the Spider-Verse is the most accurate Venom we have had on screen so far. In this movie, however, Eddie Brock is a cocky photographer that doctors an image of Spider-Man and is exposed by Peter Parker. And since he is named and shamed publicly for his own handiwork and loses his girlfriend Gwen Stacy, he goes to church and prays for Jesus to kill Spider-Man and incidentally discovers that Peter is Spider-Man. After the jazz club scene, it becomes obvious that Peter will have to let go of the suit, but the entire church sequence was poorly done. Unlike in the comics, the symbiote has bonded with the suit, which can be removed and stored. So why not just burn it? It's an easy problem to solve. I get that we need that scene to show the redemption of Peter Parker and the fall of Eddie Brock, but this is also one of the reasons why I think Venom should not have been included in this movie. We already had 4 main characters that the movie could have been focused on, but again, we have to sell those action figures somehow, right? And how he is able to see a person's face when the bell is that high up, I don't know. I can only assume that he has better vision than Superman. He ends up bonding with a symbiote that Peter is discarding and becomes Venom. He later teams up with Sandman to put Mary Jane and many innocent people at risk to get revenge for losing his girl. Do you see how shallow his character is? Everything about him screams afterthought. The pairing with Gwen Stacy and the rivalry with Parker as a photographer all feels forced. It smells of executives trying to push a character in a film due to brand recognition, and to achieve this goal, they use an established character like Gwen Stacy to do so. Eddie Brock is an interesting enough character to deserve his own movie. The introduction of the symbiote and the resolution to that conflict could have served as the base for the introduction of Venom in a future movie. Yet somehow, Venom finds his way into this film to get completely wasted and killed off. This entire outcome smells like studio meddling, and at the time fans could tell. And finally, Gwen Stacy has no substantial reason to be in this movie at all. She's only used as a prop to showcase the relationship drama between Peter and Mary Jane, as well as wedging Eddie Brock in the story. Gwen Stacy never needed to be in this movie, and if there was a need for another romantic attachment to Peter, it could have been played by the secretary Miss Brandt. The movie even showcased this during Peter's ego trip. Again, it feels like more character stuffing to get recognition from comic fans.
Of course!
Spider-Man 3 is a movie that I always have mixed feelings about. While the movie is passable as a franchise ender, it has always felt to me that Raimi was not truly down with the franchise, but the studio interference with his work pushed him to stay away from it. The movie can be fun to watch in some aspects, especially with Emo Parker and his antics, and the action sequences. But on the other hand, Sandman's story felt handicapped by the addition of Venom. Oftentimes, the movie feels like a sausage that has too many kinds of meat blended in. It is edible and can fill your stomach, but taste and pleasure is neglected with such a meal. Whenever I revisit the Raimi films, all I notice are the many threads that were left unexplored. For example, Dr. Connor's inevitable transformation, Gwen Stacy's fate and tragic ending, and the entire symbiote arc were comic storylines that I had serious interest in at the time. I wanted to see what Raimi could have done with them due to his unique style and vision. Yet this is something that we never got to see. The Amazing Spider-Man did to an extent work on the Connor story, as well as Gwen Stacy and Peter's angle. But in my honest opinion, the entire Amazing Spider-Man movies are a pale imitation of the Raimi films. I only ever got a CW vibe watching them, but more on that later. The symbiote story arc was also explored in the Sony Spider-Verse films through Venom. But those movies, while funny, are also incredibly bad films. Are they enjoyable? Sure, but they are also bad movies all the same. Spider-Man 3 was convoluted, and what was supposed to be a story of Peter's dark side, his moral decline, his aggression and dark tendencies, which are being amplified due to the symbiote, instead becomes a story that meanders to the finish line like an alcoholic doing a three-legged race. But as a fan, I am glad they exist, as it reminds me of a time when things were simpler than this. Till next time, friends.